Alright guys, let's talk about it. How do we get infinite mana, infinite fury, spirit, energy, the resources in Diablo 4? How are we going to be able to basically upkeep our resources so we can have higher uptime on DPS? Now, I will go into pieces of gear that will really help out for all of the classes, but I really want to start off the video with going over mathematically why it is much better to go ahead and be able to spam your DPS dealing ability versus needing to stop and use a generator to build up. A lot of times you may see on YouTube someone shows off, I hit for 10 million damage or 100 million damage, and while that is cool for the sake of a showcase demo, the thing is that true DPS is much more important than a cosmetic one big number every 5, every 10 seconds. And the most important part of this video is going to be actually this little math session that we're going to be doing, and I promise you'll thank me for it because it really explains and demonstrates how important resources is in the game, and this will actually increase your DPS even though you're getting lower numbers. Since you're going to be hitting more consistently with your core skill versus your generator, you will significantly increase your DPS. Let me go ahead and actually break it down with some quick little math over here. So let's just use this as an example. If our basic skill does about 5% of our character's DPS, where the core skill does 100% of the DPS, meaning the maximum damage is our core skill. And this applies to most builds. If you're playing Sorceress, it could be Mastery, but for the most part, the way the Diablo 4 is designed is your basic skills generate your resource, and then your core skills spend the resource. Now, ideally, you want to drop your basic skills so you're just spamming your big damage dealer. That's the payload. So on average, let's just use this for example so that numbers are easy. Let's say we have to spam 3 basic attacks, then we get to use our core skill. And that's kind of like the gameplay loop. You go basic, 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 then core skill. This is the way Diablo was designed. If we look at that like mathematically, how much damage are we dealing in terms of our maximum character's DPS? So if it's like 5%, 5%, 5%, then we deal 100%, right? Now, let's remove some of the DPS. Now, this could be on an aspect that would give you 20, X damage in the very beginning, or whatever the case may be. Let's just use the number of 20% DPS so it's easy for numbers. So let's say we lose that. That can be on the Paragon board, that can be on aspects, that can be on different roles of piece of gear, but let's say we just lose out on 20% DPS. In terms of looking at our damage, like the numbers that's showing up on screen, if we're losing 20% DPS, this is what it would kind of look like. But let's say we remove the DPS to have more resources. This could be aspects, rolls on gear, energy cost reduction. Again, just using this as an example here. So if we lose 20% of our DPS, but we get to use our core skill, our damage dealer, more frequently, let's look at that number. So basically, we would be dropping one of our basic skills and we will hit with another core skill. So if we do that math over here, again, we're losing, let's say 20% DPS, we'd hit for, let's say 4% damage, and then we'd hit for 80% and then 80%. So even though it may seem like we lose DPS when we swap different pieces of gear or different aspects, in reality, the numbers are smaller, but the true DPS, like our uptime on our core skill, is going to be significantly higher. And this works for all classes. It's not just for whatever class we're showing here, but I want to go ahead and demonstrate that because that's the most important thing. So we are effectively getting a huge amount of DPS boost. That's over 50% of our damage just being increased because we can spam our core skill one more time versus having just to use a generator. Again, this is a simple example. It can get a lot more complex when we start adding lucky hit and other things that can have a proc chance for a skill that has a higher lucky hit chance. So now that we get like the basic understandings of it, let me go ahead and actually show you guys what areas on pieces of gear to actually roll. And I'm going to put in air quotations infinite like resource, and the reason why is because in theory we don't actually get infinite resource, but it's just a thing I've been seeing. How do you have unlimited resource, unlimited mana, energy, fury, whatever the case may be depending on their class? This is where we can actually increase our maximum resource. So going over some examples here, it's kind of into gear acquisition, but it's a huge tie-in to your DPS as well. So on our helmet, ideally what we're trying to look for, and maximum mana is great, but cooldown reduction in theory for a lot of builds, let's say you're playing Barbarian with those shouts, those being upkept can actually give you resource generation because you may have an aspect that will give you it. This is going to apply to all classes. I know I'm going to be showing off the Sorceress right here, but this applies to all classes in most circumstances. We'll get into like weapons and why it could be a little bit different there, because offhands can actually roll like a bunch of resource stuff, whereas weapons in general cannot unless it's a unique item. So ideally getting cooldown reduction can also also be a secondary factor that will also increase your resource, giving you more resource because you can have other abilities. Let's say Frost Nova up a lot more, where if you kill enemies, you're going to be generating more mana, or if you hit enemies, whatever the case may be. Again, this is more general than just like the sorceress one. I'm just going to use this one as an example here. And then on top of that, getting lucky hit chance where you have a barrier. There are some classes now that you can add fortification. There are also other classes now where you can actually have barrier on lucky hit, and if you run, let's say, pants like temerity or other items that may give your character barriers, this could still apply. Lucky hit chance is a huge factor in for a lot of different builds to actually gain resource, specifically with your gloves. This is a huge thing that you may want to consider throwing into your build if you are having resource problems. So that will be a great addition as well. And then just in general, the all stats or your main stat can actually apply resources. Now, it depends on the class that you play, because what's interesting with Diablo 4 is going over these stats can do different things. It could be different dodge chance, be extra damage. Depends on the class that you play, but there's always resource generation. And on your Paragon board towards the end of the game, you will get a decent amount of resource generation, like for Sorceress of Willpower. Most classes will get about 300 to 400 to basically every stat in the game, because the Paragon board requires you to get it. So you may actually reach a different breakpoint by getting, let's say, Willpower on the Sorceress that you normally wouldn't think that you'd want to get, but if one piece of gear just rolls it, it's really not that bad, because you still are getting a extra set of resource. Or again, you get extra damage, you know, extra resistances. Again, it depends on the class you play. You're going to have to open up your character sheet and kind of mouse over and see which one it gives your resource. So that can be another thing to factor in. So all stats is not a bad stat on your character, considering the way that the damage multipliers work now, because crit and vulnerable are basically going to be additive damage. Getting all stats where your character has that main stat, in our case, if we're playing Sorceress, Intelligence, that will actually give us more damage as well. So getting all stats or your main character stats can actually significantly help out with not only more damage, but it can also meet certain thresholds on your Paragon board to give you extra mana, in our case with the Sorceress. When you reach like some of the yellow nodes, it'll be extra bonus Fury, and that does add up quite a bit. Again, maximum Fury, Energy, Spirit, all this is great on your helmet. It significantly helps out. Now, I already talked about lucky hit chance, because it can activate certain things where you would have a certain thing activate, specifically getting that up to a chance to restore primary resource. Now, just as a heads up, this does not mean I have a 5% chance to restore primary resource on every single hit. What this means is it's based off of the lucky hit chance of the ability. Each ability has its own lucky hit chance. So if we have a 50% chance for lucky hit, this 5% is actually a 2.5. And I know it sounds small, but if you're hitting tons of enemies on screen, this will significantly help out. Also, attack speed can also be tied into this, because if I'm able to, let's say, use my basic skill, my generate, I'm spamming it much faster, I'm able to gain those resources depending on, of course, the class that you're playing. Some basic skills give you energy or resource, and that can actually help out, and that is tied into getting a kind of infinite resource, so to speak, because you may need to use a basic skill to activate some sort of bonus on your Paragon, like in Rogue with one of the Paragon, like legendary nodes, you can get more damage, or if you're running Condemnation, that kind of thing. That is also tied to getting more resource. Another thing that will actually really solve the resource, this is specifically a newer item that came out in Season 2, but it's also on the Eternal Realm. Tibalt's Will is going to be massive. So what Tibalt's Will does is, while we are going to be gaining Unstoppable, it has to be gaining Unstoppable. If you keep on reapplying Unstoppable, this won't actually apply, so I'll give you a bonus tip there. So you have to end Unstoppable to regain Unstoppable in order for you to gain the bonus. But whenever you become Unstoppable, you actually gain 50 of your primary resource. And this is actually pretty great in Season 2, and the reason why is there is a power that you can run called Metamorphosis. Metamorphosis gives you pretty much permanent Unstoppable, but you want it to actually end, and then you want to activate it again. If you keep on, again, looping your Unstoppable, and you never have any downtime, this will not apply. But this will actually give you that bonus resource. So again, that's great on the roll, but looking at its unique power, this is massive for most builds. This is pretty much the best in slot for most characters in the game. But yeah, Tibalt's Will is excellent. Also, going over your boots, mana cost reduction or whatever resource cost reduction is good. Movement speed is actually kind of tied to your DPS as well. If you're able to move faster on the Rogue, there's extra generation based off of like movement. So there's other things that you can incorporate in your builds that are kind of more niche and obscure. Going into certain weapons, you can see this one is unique, where the attacks reduce the evade's cooldown. If I can evade a lot more, I can get Tibalt's Will proc much faster, because I get Metamorphosis, and this is activating our Evade, and then we're going to be able to gain that Unstoppable. So there's a little bit of like play with like certain unique items to factor in as well. And getting even plus ranks to skills where Frost Nova is up more often, that is essentially more resource. So you got to think kind of outside of the box. There are other things where like your Ice Armor can have a modification where you get extra regen as well, so you can consider that. Your Flame Shield can also give you extra mana cost reduction. There's other things that factor in. Specifically on the Amulet, getting mana cost reduction or plus to defensive skills, again, that can actually apply. Again, this goes to other characters. If you get maybe a passive that gives you extra resource, that could be good as well. The thing that is going to give you the most resource in the game is pretty much going to be your rings. Your rings are heavily tied to a bunch of resource, so that can be your maximum stat of your resource, that could be your resource generation, and also remember, getting lucky hit can actually apply, so that's really good. And then for our offhand over here, this could be another source of getting resource cost reduction, as well as getting that chance to get primary resource, is pretty big. And a lot of people have been asking me what's better, dagger or wand on sorceress. I prefer getting lucky hit chance. It's so much better. The other thing on daggers is just additive damage. Getting that lucky hit proc chance, getting extra resource. Again, going over like this little like thing over here where we did the math, it is mathematically more DPS if you're able to keep on spamming your big damage dealer. Another thing is just in general, the rings in this game will give you a lot of resource depending on the build that you play. Like you can get the one where it's giving you more damage based on your resource, so you can actually apply DPS to having more resource. Also, Umbral is great with Penitent Greaves if you combo this, if you happen to have an open pair of boot slots. If you run Penitent Greaves plus this one over here, and you can even do the Aspect of Shared Misery, more crowd control, making that spread. You get 4 resource every single time that any enemy is within melee range when you are using your Penitent Greaves. This is excellent for any resources. Now, on bosses, this is pretty terrible because, well, you're not going to crowd control the enemy till the stagger bar goes all the way up, but this is a huge source of all the trash mobs. You just get like infinite resource, and it makes things super smooth. Another thing is that check out the Vampiric powers. Maybe your ultimate can give you a bunch of resource depending on, you know, your build. You could also factor in maybe in season 2, since we're in season 2, Feed the Coven could be an excellent addition if you happen to have a build that can just get extra, you know, small amount of damage. This one over here for your companions or minions, they have a chance to actually restore primary resource and increase our damage. So not only are we getting more damage, but more resource, and it's going to be pretty good on the Necromancer if, you know, the skeletons or whatever minion is just landing those lucky hit. Another thing that got buffed, if you can use it, is Starlight. Starlight Aspect gives you 20 to 40 of your primary resource for a set amount of life that you heal. If you take a bunch of damage and then run something like Undying where you're able to heal 3%, or if you're running Andariels and you're taking a bunch of damage, this thing is actually pretty godly. They actually like doubled its stats previously, so it's a great addition. Another thing that I always recommend is to go to any build website, add all the Paragon boards, and type in the word mana, type in the word fury, whatever, and see if you can reach these nodes. Some of these nodes are massive. This one gives you 16 for 1 point. That's pretty much like a perfect roll on a piece of gear. So don't skip out on getting mana on the Paragon board or fury resource, whatever. And if we're looking at just in general for lots of different builds, you'll see that Tabalts is consistently in here. Don't skip out on Tabalts if you're really having resource problems. I know it's an endgame item, but that is something that you can factor in as well. Other things in the game that can also give you extra resources, look at the uniques for your character's build, specifically like with the Druid, Tempest Roar, this thing is massive, or the Barbarian getting the extra shout cooldown reduction. Those things are massive and they are tied to your character's power progression. Another thing, if you're playing, let's say, Rogue over here, Consuming Shadows could be excellent. And what I would recommend you to do is type in the like resource. So in Rogue's case, it would be energy. So we would type this in and then check out where can we get extra energy over here. You know, we got a lucky hit. We have a chance to gain 8 energy. So check out your character's build, and this will significantly help you out. You can also use different build websites to kind of get an idea, but I really recommend you also look into the skill tree. Type in, let's say, Fury for Barbarian. What areas do you maybe get some sort of Fury or are relied on Fury? This one over here, or we are Berserking, we're gonna get extra Fury generation. So there's a lot of complexity to this, but I think it's a really great video because it was asked time and time again with most of my builds. I always try to prioritize not having a basic skill, and that is simply because, well, the basic skill in terms of, like, you know, doing the math, you're going to get significantly less DPS. So you want to upkeep your mana as much as you can, and these are the ways that you can get infinite mana, so to speak. So that's going to wrap it up. Hopefully you guys enjoyed the video and learned something new. If you did, drop a like on it. If you're new here and you want to be up to date on more Diablo guides and other videos, hit subscribe to the bell, and I'll catch you in the next one. Peace out.